options. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. I'm hanging out on the deck of my house in North Minneapolis. As it turns out, this is the day they have the monthly emergency siren. So you'll hear that in the background. Apologies, but you understand. Well, today I have the pleasure of meeting and connecting with Karl Dunn. Karl Dunn is an author. His book, How to Burn a Rainbow. We'll talk about that and a lot of more things. One of the things I'm interested in talking about with him is his experience, his take, his presentation on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And before the show, I told him that my particular interest comes from my work as a director, board member of the Greater Twin Cities United Way. That organization depends on corporate philanthropy and individual philanthropy. And as we look at corporate philanthropy here in Minnesota and probably everywhere else, the question is, what is the mood? What is the appetite, the understanding, the concerns about the movement towards diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because right now there seems to be a particular and sometimes some places vicious pushback, rejection or challenging of the idea that diversity and equity and inclusion are positive traits that are consistent with and actually the jewels of the idea, the concept of the democracy that we celebrate as Americans. And so that's a general conversation. And what's wonderful, I think, about the conversation I'm going to have with Brother Karl Dunn is that he looks at this from within the inside of the inside. I may be overstating the case, but that's how I'm approaching the conversation. I think he's got a unique perspective on looking at how marginalized communities are historically and consistently excluded, devalued, and ignored in many ways, and how we must find ways, not only in the corporate world, but in our personal community lives, our family lives, to understand the value and therefore the sense of equity that every human being must enjoy, can enjoy, and as she or he enjoys that, we move ourselves towards a more perfect union, not only in this country, but on the planet. That's my take. Before we start, I want to thank you all for joining the show, watching the show, wherever you are. I invite you to subscribe, to go to YouTube, Insight News MN, and become a subscriber. Call your friends and tell them that this conversation is going on. And if you can't watch it right now, watch it later. You may be connecting with us on Facebook, on YouTube for Black Press USA. You could be connecting through LinkedIn and Twitter. However, we appreciate your presence and we invite you to support this conversation. We try to deliver, we promise that we deliver what we call robust conversations. I'm sure this will be one as well. Well, let me tell you about my guest, Karl Dunn, and then we'll get into the conversation. Again, he's the author of a book, How to Burn a Rainbow. The subtitle is My Gay Marriage Didn't Make Me Whole. My Divorce Did. That's interesting. We'll come to that in a second. Karl Dunn was the global advertising lead on several world famous brands like Mini Cooper, Levi's, and Asics. He spent over 2 decades as a multi-award winning advertising creative, working in Australia, Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. His career culminated as the director of innovation for a powerhouse global advertising network. Then it all burned to the ground when he told his husband that he wanted a divorce. Just a few months later, he was sleeping on an air mattress in a former squat in Berlin with no job, visas, or money. He used his divorce as his crisis of identity, or using that divorce as his crisis of identity. He chronicled the experience in his book, How to Burn a Rainbow, where he gave up chasing everybody else's dream in order to find his own. So, um, his intro, his bio says that it's an eat, pray, love style, riches to rags journey from LA to Berlin, an intimate, honest, and revealing story about divorce and self love. The questions and reframes the entire institution of marriage. As Carl says in his book, My Marriage Didn't Make Me Whole, My Divorce Did. He's interested in themes of self love like LGBTQ plus and social justice. His career as an author is just beginning. He seeks to show that the questions we should be asking, uh, the question should not be if LGBTQ plus people should exist, but why LGBTQ plus people exist. And it's a question he believes is of crucial importance in the world. He lives between LA and Berlin and works as a freelance advertising consultant to cause-based brands and LGBTQ plus endeavors by businesses. Well, Carl, what a wonderful resume, a wonderful bio. And I'm so pleased to meet you and have you as a guest on today's program. Let me open up by saying hello, and start
Hey
off.
there.
What's on your mind? What's on your, as you hear this recapitulation of your story, what thoughts come to mind? What feelings do you want to make sure that we cover in the course of this hour conversation?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting to hear you talk and give that bio because it's a really funny thing when you put a book out in the world. You start to discover very quickly what it is. Like as the writer of the book, I have a very particular relationship with the book, but then and writers will appreciate this. It'll live on your laptop for years, and then suddenly one day, after a lot of work, it's like out there in the world and it's published, and now it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to everybody who reads it, and it starts developing a life of its own. So when I was at the beginning of this journey, I was really solidly coming to talk about the way we have experienced marriage and divorce from the LGBTQ plus community. But as I've gone through when you when you start a journey, you often don't know where it's going to land. And over the course of that, like while I've covered a lot of that kind of stuff and the things that I've talked about, and those are really important themes to me, DEI is a new one that's come up. And I found myself starting to speak on this as a keynote speaker because of these very particular experiences I had going through a divorce as a gay man. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing when you write a book because you feel compelled to do it. There were no books on gay divorce. So a friend of mine encouraged me to write one because he said, look, you're a writer. And I was
Mhm.
telling him some of the stuff that was going on with me and things I was realizing and revelations. He's like, you need to put this in a book, Queen. You need to do it. So I did, and now here we are. Yeah, and it was funny writing it. I had no idea how it was going to end because I was literally in the middle of the divorce as it was all unfolding. So
Well, tell the
it's a
story.
piece of yeah.
Tell the story. I mean, I'm interested. I'm coming to this fresh and curious, right? As a human being, tell the story
Mhm.
about gay marriage and the experiences and your statement, your discovery that your wholeness has come through divorce. And I'm presuming that that simply means that divorce. It doesn't mean divorce from everything forever, but that's one of the
Mm.
points that you've experienced. So let's talk about that as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think the history of my community with marriage is pretty well documented. People know that, in some states we had it, and then we've always had it. In some states we got it, and then it was taken away. And then
Mhm.
nationally that all changed, thank goodness. And now we can get married and that's accepted everywhere. So
Mhm.
we fought very hard for this. But I think, and I speak for myself here, did not ask enough questions about it on the way in. And I think this would ring true for a lot of people who are minorities, is that when the greater part of society or the larger part of society says, here's something you can't have, and we're going to put that behind barbed wire, your focus goes to the barbed wire, not on actually what the thing is. Like, I never really questioned, is this something we should be fighting for? I just did it because people said we couldn't have it, so we'll show them, we'll get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we fought for it. My husband and I both did. My ex-husband and I both fought for the right before we had met. And so then when we were together and it seemed obvious we were going to be a couple we thought for the rest of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
we thought, well, we should get married. Like, we should do that, because we fought for this thing and we can now. And, we should be good gays and do this because it'll just make it easier for everybody else to come. But, I had no idea going into it what it takes to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we don't have any track record with marriage. So we have like zero with divorce. And I found as mine began, which was instigated by myself, I was clueless, absolutely clueless of what to do. And I couldn't ask my friends because none of them had been through one. We'd done breakups, we hadn't done
Mm-hmm.
divorces. And that's a very different ball game. And I was floundering at the beginning of it. But what I decided to do, something I'd noticed about my straight male friends, is that the moment their wives or girlfriends get pregnant for the first time, certainly the men I know anyway, they go, "Oh my gosh, I'm like an overgrown boy. And in 9 months, I have to be a role model for a human being. Like, who am I? What do I stand for? What are my values? What do I want to pass on?" And these guys start to get their stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in our community, we don't, because we don't have the default of children. Obviously, we can have children now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've always been able to have children, but it's
Mm-hmm.
far more accepted and understood that
Sure.
that's and pursued by a lot of people in our community. But because that's not necessarily a default for us, that moment that of having to really figure out who you are doesn't necessarily happen for us the same way. So I thought, okay, I've seen my straight male friends do this. I'm going to use my divorce in the same way. I'm going to use this as my crisis of identity. I'm not going to run from it. I'm going to sit with everything that it comes with it, because I want to figure myself out. I mean, I basically dated the same guy like 5 times in a row and got married to the last one. And I was seeking this character type out every time, which is no shade on them. It was just that I would seek the same person out, which was not the right fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it would always end the same way. So I had to figure this out. So that's what I meant about the crisis of identity. And so, which worked, and I definitely, found this place of peace. But that's what I meant about how my marriage didn't make me whole, which I was expecting it to. But it was actually the divorce that came after that did that.
Before you got married, what did you want in life and from life? And before you got to the age of thinking about marriage, what did the world look like to you? What were your aspirations, your dreams? I'm talking about Karl as a kid. Karl as a 5-year-old, a 9-year-old. How did the world look? How did you assemble reality? How did the environment, the parents, the people you were in contact with inform the you that you were becoming?
Well, when I was a kid growing up in Australia, I had a really cool home life. My family are great. I was very lucky. I got great people. And my parents were kind of like latter-day corporate hippies. I mean, they were very open-minded, very spiritual, worked in the corporate world, but I think they raised us very well. But that said, I'm also growing up in this environment of, when I was 11 was when all you heard on the news was about AIDS and HIV, and that it was this thing that was coming for gay men, that maybe it was a punishment from God. It was something that is, we were often mentioned in the same, like they would put like, homosexuals, pedophiles, and injecting drug users. We would always seem to be in the same, like that's how they would always talk about us. So in my early teens, when it kind of became obvious to me that I was feeling like I wasn't the same as everybody else, I'm actually it may not come across in this interview but I'm actually quite funny. And I think a lot of gay men develop their sense of humor in the playground at school when people are asking them why they don't have girlfriends. And you're like, look over there, and like, you'll do anything and be the funny guy and whatever, just distract, because you can't really figure it out yourself. And this is growing up in Sydney, which is this is the city that gave the world Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It was a very gay city. Mardi Gras. I mean, this is before the internet. Mardi Gras was, I'm not kidding, some of the best displays by a minority group I've ever seen. It was a powerhouse event. It was one of the biggest tourist attractions in the Southern Hemisphere. And, to know that that's going on in your own backyard, you're like, okay, my people are around me. I'm not like growing up in small town, thank goodness, but I'm still trying to figure it out. And I'm going to an all boys school. And my thing at high school was, I just have to get out of this place alive with my secret intact, which I sort of did, and this is way before this, when homosexuality is still a criminal offense. So there's no LGBTQ plus support groups or whatever. Like you're on your, well, it's funny, all the gay guys in my year, we've all found each other in the years since then. What's funny is my best friend at high school is also gay. And we're still really good friends, but neither of us told each other in high school because we were so worried, because we were the only real true friend that the other one had, and neither of us wanted to risk that, So you grow up.
Did you know that you each were gay at the time?
Oh, 100%.
You did?
I knew I was. I knew I was when I was still in high school.
But did you know he was? Did you know he was as well?
Not at all. Not at all. I just thought he was flamboyant. He came from a very theatrical family. His mother was an opera singer. So I just thought, he's like a theater kid. I mean, this is like pre-internet. Do any of us really know ourselves then? But I mean, when I got to university, obviously everything changed. I mean, no one cared at university. And but this thing has always been something that has, when I got into advertising, I finished my advertising course. I went to see a headhunter, and she was like, your folio is fantastic. Here's a list of agencies you should be calling up and trying to get interviews at, and da-da. And then somewhere in the conversation, I have to make an offhand comment about my boyfriend. And she went, hang on, sorry, are you gay? I'm like, yeah. She goes, oh, give me the sheet back. And she literally crossed off half of the agencies and said, don't go to those places. Your career will go nowhere.
Wow.
Like, you will not be welcome. I was like, good to know. So, from the outset, it's a very strange thing being.
And let me ask you about that real quickly. So her action then was not condemning or judging you, but protective.
No.
She was saying she knows the environment out there, and I'm not going to put you into the situation where you're going to be traumatized by these jerks who don't know any better, whose lifestyle doesn't allow them to see you fully as a human being. That's kind of the picture.
It's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And thank goodness for her. I mean, she was definitely an ally, at the time when it was all you could do was really just protect people from the worst of what you knew could happen to them, for her in this case, in our industry. But it's always been a thing. I mean, it's always been, I've definitely not got jobs because I was gay. I lost the best job of my life because I was gay. We had a brilliant client, and then they changed it, and we got a very conservative, very religious guy, took it over, and it was TikTok. Like, I was like, it's a matter of time, man. He's not a fan. He is not a fan. And ironically, it was, it all came up when I got engaged, and it was not long after that, the things happened, and I lost that job. I left, I should say. I just want to be clear about that. I left, but it just became a situation where it's not good for me, and there's no version of this where I win, because when it comes to business, companies will often say we're a family, but when it comes to business, it's the money wins, so you've got to be realistic about that as well. I mean, it's something that has always been I think what's great about it is it gives me a very different perspective on the world.
Mhm.
Because, I think what's strange about being a white gay guy, a cisgender gay man, is you look like the world's built for you,
Mhm.
but you know very much what it is to be a minority and to feel that oppression in your life and the presumptions that come from other people. But the strange thing is nobody knows until you tell them. So yeah, it's an interesting one. You definitely have days where you're like, do I just want to say anything about that comment that was just made in the room, or do I really just want to go home and cook dinner tonight and not have to tell the story about a fight I had in a boardroom?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then you're like, did I let the cause down because I didn't say something? I don't know. There's a lot. You have a lot of that. Which
When you said the money wins, that rung a bell in my head. What do you mean by that? And I ask you that over time. I know what you meant, but I'm asking you to
mm,
talk about it. Uh, uh, are you satisfied that the money wins? Is that the nature of the thing? And must it be so? And is there an alternative to that notion that at the end of the day, the money wins?
well, they always say if you want to find out who's behind anything, follow the money. Because it's inevitably either about money or it's about power. And those are the things that are, in most democracies that are, where capitalism is in place. That's how it is. So, and I understand, like when you work for big companies, it is, I think the smaller places, the more you can, it's easier for people to stand by their
Mhm.
people. But I think that as we get into these much larger corporations, and what we're seeing around the world is, everybody's getting bought out by bigger, and in my industry, there are, about 4 or 5 holding companies that own a lot of the advertising agencies. It kind of gets all homogenized, and the personal connection that you have with the people that you work with, it starts to lessen because, as it must, when something gets so big that when I started in advertising, for instance, there were in the 90s, there were a lot of independent advertising agencies doing great work around the world. And when you joined one of them, it was like joining a gang.
Mm.
It was like when you got into that shop, it was like,
Mhm.
whoa, like that is you're a hot like creative. You got into that place,
Mhm.
and every shop had a style of work that it did, so you
Mhm.
really felt like you belonged to something.
Mm.
But I think the larger corporations get, the more we as individuals in them feel a little lost,
Mm.
a little less valued. And I don't want to be down on, like, I don't want to sound like, one of those, it's very easy, I think, to slam capitalism, but when it's profits before the people, because it could be the other way around, it's, I think we all lose in the end when it becomes like that. A lot of companies take the default of the shareholders, and we've got to do the quarterlies. And yeah, but shareholders are people, and all the people in the company are people, and I don't know. Yeah,
Let's go back to the personal. That was a nice
let's
diversion.
do.
Thank you. And so, uh, in your marriage, you thought
Mm,
that being married would make you whole. Talk about that.
yes.
What were you looking for when you
Well,
decided that marriage was the pathway to completion fulfillment?
I honestly thought it was going to be a magic wand that you know, really more than marriage, it was about my partner. I think I expected him, my ex-husband, to kind of wave some magic wand and make all the dark feelings that I had about myself go away. Because I wasn't prepared to do that myself. I wasn't prepared to do the work and really have a good look inside. So let me
What
grab this
what
person.
what dark feelings did you have about yourself?
Oh, I mean, the self-loathing,
Mhm.
I think, and I think that often comes when you're a minority. You keep pushing back against the idea that you're lesser than, but if you hear it enough, yeah, it gets in there. It starts living in you.
Yep.
You open up any magazine, you're like, well, the people in here don't look like me, and
Right.
there's a very subliminal things, but it's like 1,000 things a day, and individually, each one maybe doesn't mean much, but you add it all up, and there's just
Mhm.
this sense of constantly being on the back foot. So, and definitely had these feelings of inadequacy that someone I loved, someone who I was attracted to would never be attracted to someone like me. Um, and also I think this feeling of needing to work for a relationship, to work for love, that it doesn't come to you easily. And I think maybe that's something we get told a lot when
Hmm.
we were younger gay men. Oh, you're going to have a lonely life. You're going to be lonely. Like there was a sort of impossibility that long-term love was a possibility for us. So the idea was, oh, you're going to be like sad and lonely. And I think that gets in there as well. So marriage, like when I landed this guy and I was really in love. I was, I thought he was God's gift. I really
Hmm.
did. So when I got married, it was like I got married because I wanted this on lock.
Hmm.
I wanted all because he was a hottie and brilliant. I mean, absolutely brilliant. I mean, we connected mentally on so many ways that were magical, but it was widely considered that I was, dating in the bear world, in my subculture of gay life, was widely considered that I was kind of dating like the Giselle Bundchen, like a supermodel. So when I got married, I'm like, I want that unlocked so that people know, like, that's what I've got at home.
Hmm.
That's what
Hmm.
I got, and which is terrible. I mean, what a terrible amount of pressure to put on your partner. Like, that's your job. I'm not even going to tell you that's your job, but that's your job. And you better do it right. And
Kind of like a
yeah, and I think
trophy relationship.
a little bit, and I think a lot of what we were doing, I would say this from my side, a lot of it was performative. A lot of it
Hmm.
was for how it looked to other
Hmm.
people. I mean,
Hmm.
which is not to say we did not have something. We definitely
Hmm.
did. But I think there's often a pressure to perform it for the world so that everybody knows you've got a good thing going on. And I mean, I would say also in the process of that, and probably what fueled my really fueled the desire to get married was when we got engaged. And this is something I talk about in How to Burn a Rainbow, about this moment where I walked into the office and I had a ring on my finger. We got engaged over the weekend. And it's Monday morning, and my partner jumped out of his chair. My work partner jumps out of his chair. He said, "Oh my God, dude, you did it!" Because we've been talking about how I was going to propose. And within like 5 minutes, every straight married guy in the place is in my office. Champagne comes out of nowhere, cups, back slaps, bear hugs. I couldn't believe what a big deal it was for all of them. But then it's like we'll never really completely understand each other's lives, like straight guys and gay guys. But we all know at that point in the office, we all knew what it was to plan it, get the ring, plan it, get down on one knee, pop the question, and put the ring on the person you love more than anyone else on earth. And now we have that in common, and it was absolute. And this is going to sound, and this is terrible, and I hated admitting this to myself, but I write about this in the book as well, that was the first time in my life I ever felt like I was as good as they were. And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
loved how that felt, but I hated how much I loved it,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. Marriage doing some heavy lifting that I was not prepared to do.
When and how did it go south on you? I mean, you obviously were going through a process all the time of
Yeah.
becoming and
Yeah.
evolving and growing. And so I'm suspecting that at some point in time, the growth process led to the next level. If you didn't find wholeness and completion in the
Mm,
marriage, you expected it, but you still were seeking it and you still deserved it, right?
mm,
And
yeah.
so your path kept moving you towards what you have written about as a wholeness that, and the writing, it's, I haven't read it yet, but I told you I will read it,
That's right. Yeah.
should
Mhm.
suggest to me that that's a snapshot as well of where you are
Mm.
at the time that you're presenting this analysis, the story, the narrative, that but it's it's obvious to me that you're a dynamic individual who's always growing, always changing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean
Try
that's
to. I
yeah,
try.
okay.
Yeah.
And so this process of becoming, how did that lead to the divorce, to that sense of maybe one step closer towards the wholeness that you sought in moving into the marriage?
Well, I the thing is, it's like, and this is where the title of the book comes from, How to Burn a Rainbow. I've been chasing a lot of rainbows my entire life. I had done everything everyone told me to do. I had everything that the gay world told me to do. Like, you know, be a good gay, find a bloke, get a house, be a bit fabulous, look at us overseas trips, la la la. Give back to your community, like do all that. And then I did everything the heterosexual world told me as well, which is like achieve,
Mhm.
climb that corporate ladder, get that next paycheck, get that next promotion, get that next title. I did all of those things. And then I woke up one day and I'm like, well, I did it all. And I'm looking around at this house and this guy and this job and the dogs and a huge group of friends in Los Angeles. We had a good life. And I'm looking at it all and thinking, how come I'm not happy? I don't understand why I'm not happy. I should be happy. I did everything everyone told me to do. I'm owed. Where is it?
Mm.
And it was this strange, elusive thing. And what I realized was, because I'd followed everybody else's script, I hadn't followed my own. I hadn't had the courage to follow my own. And instead, I kind of outsourced it to what everyone says you're meant to do. And that was really the point where I thought and then we had some personal problems, because I can only presume what might have been going on, for my husband. I don't know. We've never really, sadly, one of the things that happens when you get divorced and you do lawyers at 10 paces is you stop talking to your husband. I don't think we actually even spoke to each other. I mean, the divorce was maybe only 6 months in, and I think that was the last time we ever spoke to each other.
Mm.
So it went for another year after that.
Mm.
So I can only presume what was going on for him at the time. But yeah, and so that's what kicked off the journey. And then it was a spectacular series of losses. And I was not prepared for how much you lose, how quickly, because here's an interesting thing is what you discover with divorce law is it's written for the battle of the sexes as they stood at the end of the 80s, start of the 90s. And it's written in the non-sexist language of the one who earns more and the one who earns less,
Mhm.
which we know for all the wrong reasons. The one who earns more is the man, and the one who earns less is the woman, because women are expected to leave their jobs and raise the children. They're not given the same opportunities or paid the same amount to do the same work. And so the divorce law is written with this idea in mind that there's a guy earning money, there's a woman probably at home, or maybe she has a job but doesn't make as much, and there are children who are sort of by default her responsibility. Because when you go through a divorce as two people of the same gender, you're like, this makes no sense. Like, no sense at all, And my friends were like, I don't understand this. I'm like, I know. I was paying half my take-home income and all my lawyer fees and all of his lawyer fees and all of the community costs. But if you're a straight guy who's married to a woman and kids, that's just the default. That's normal. Two
Mhm.
guys with no kids, it's like, this doesn't compute, but that's the law,
Mm.
because we got marriage equality, but we haven't updated divorce for anything that isn't that first model. So what I say in the book is, we didn't get the right to marry, we got their right to marry
Hmm.
and their right to what they think a fair divorce is, which when you go through it, you realize it's not. So the losses began, I
Mhm.
mean, by the time I got fired
So
from my job. Yeah,
lo
go on.
losses for you and losses for him, or, I mean, how did that play out? What was his story, his side of that experience? Did
I
it
would
all
say his
fall on
side of
you?
that. Well, I would say his side of that experience is he was left by his husband suddenly and unexpectedly. I would
Mhm.
say is probably how it seemed. I can only
Mhm.
presume. I don't
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
Um, and I think there was a life that I did not want to continue living, that maybe he was very happy in and wanted that to continue, but I did not like our life. And so, yeah, I think he would be. I can only presume, and also when you write a memoir, you have to get defamation insurance, and I'm covered for my book. I'm not covered for other things that I would say, so I have to be cautious.
Sure,
But
sure.
also, to be honest, with the passage of time, all the anger and the revenge and all that stuff that I
Mhm.
definitely wanted at some point, you just like you realize like I'm at least 50% responsible for this entire debacle that was our
Mhm.
divorce, at least, if not more. So
Yeah.
it's fine. But,
But you're saying that
yeah,
you're covering, but you're handling 80% of the cost.
it
Is
was a lot. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was a lot. And it took me losing my job because my client left the agency. It took me losing my job. And the moment I lost my job, I was like, I am out of here, because I got kind of chewed up and spat out by corporate America, by the legal system. And my old job running Mini Cooper was in Berlin, so I had a long history with the city, and it was the only place I could think of going. I had friends, I knew I could crash somewhere. To go home to Australia would have felt like defeat. And I landed in Berlin with my hair on fire, and I had almost no money left.
Mhm.
And we were nowhere near the end of the divorce. And I was almost broke and sleeping on an air mattress in a former squat, which was now an artist collective, and kind of destitute a little bit. And it gave me a lot of empathy for what a lot of heterosexual men go through, because I think when you're a straight guy going through a divorce, there's no way to win. Like, if you leave her, you're a bastard. And if she leaves you, well, you must have done something. And that's kind of the default options that a guy gets, and and then there's the massive expense of it that I really, I mean, I, I kind of saw how two bad mistakes compounded how people end up on the street, because I definitely glimpsed, I got, I had more proximity to that than I ever thought I would get to in my life.
Hmm.
So it was kind of pretty profound, but it was part of getting to rock bottom. So I couldn't run from anything
Mhm. Mhm.
and had to sit with all the emotions that I said I wanted to get through. So that was also part of it, I had to lose everything to make myself sit still and just deal with it.
So you're writing as you're going through
Yeah.
this. What are you discovering as you write? What aha moments come to you in the process of reviewing not just history, but what's going on right now? Are you learning things as you write about yourself, about your current and
Yeah.
very recent experience?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's very interesting. Like, you're the person, like, there are kind of three Carls, weirdly. There's like the Carl who's in the book, there's the Carl who wrote the book,
Mhm.
and then there's the Carl who's published the book and life has gone on. And they have three very different points of view on the world. Like, I look at the book now and there's things I've written in the book. I'm like, actually, my POV's kind of moved on since then.
Mhm.
Like, I would say, I wasn't for marriage or against marriage. I'm pro, I'm actually pro choice, like your absolutely informed choice of
Mhm.
what marriage is to you, religiously, spiritually, economically, um, so, socially.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
should know
Yeah,
this word, but in terms of society,
sure,
you
sure.
should know all this stuff for yourself. Ask yourself those hard questions and make sure that lines up with what your partner is thinking as well. I mean, we never talked about it. We may have got married for very different reasons. I don't
Mhm.
know. So, but I would actually, but for me, I would have said I'll never get married
Mhm.
ever again, because I don't want. What I found is, when you're married, the government owns your relationship. When you sign a marriage contract, you're literally signing the ownership of it over. So when you want out, you have to do it by their rules. And I just didn't want that anymore. I would rather it be a conversation with if I ever get married again, or if I ever want to be with someone forever again, that's something we figure out for ourselves at the beginning
Mhm.
of how we want that to go if it was to end. And we make these decisions while we're in love. And that's what we do for each other at the end, instead of trying to figure out what's fair when you both hate each other. So I would say that, but I was in conversation with a man called Dan Savage, who you may know, who has he very generously offered. He was an early fan of the book, very generously offered to be my conversation partner in Seattle, and we got right into it about marriage. Because he has a really interesting relationship set up. He's married. He and his partner both have boyfriends. He talks about this all the time on his podcast. That is that takes some maneuvering. I have enough trouble with one partner and a wardrobe. But he said, and I thought this was really interesting, is that he thinks LGBTQ plus people getting married has completely expanded the idea of what marriage can be. Because whereas it used to be, it was very rare to encounter a heterosexual couple with an open marriage or an open relationship. And if they did, they probably didn't talk about it because their friends may not get it, whatever. Now it's like, whereas before someone who's married might have said to their partner, hey, well, look, David and Raheem have an open relationship and they see other people and that seems fun for them. Like maybe we could try it. It's like, that's different. Now it's like, well, David and Raheem are married and we're married. Seems to be working for them. And you know what I mean? It's suddenly like,
There's a
it's an
shift.
interesting mental shift.
Hmm.
All it is a ring and a piece of paper,
Hmm.
but it's a really interesting mental shift because a lot of heterosexual couples I've met since going on this book tour have said it's in like when their gay friends got married, it kind of opened their marriages up to different possibilities. So I don't know. You learn all kinds of things when you go on a book tour. A lot of people tell you a lot of stuff. Yeah, it's great, actually. I love it. Yeah.
Let me pivot a little bit and go broad
Sure.
and come back to personal. I mentioned before the show that here in Minnesota, the big news today is that our governor, Tim Walz, was selected by Kamala Harris to become
Mm,
her running mate in her
yeah.
pursuit of the office of president of the United States of America. And
Mm,
among the stories, the narratives that were presented by both Governor Walz and the people that were doing the presentation at the announcement yesterday in Philadelphia, one of the stories they told was about Tim Walz being a high school teacher and
mm,
a football coach. And
mm,
as a football coach, he was approached by a student who was gay, who was back then feeling the uncertainty and the turmoil of social relationships and
mm,
definition and acceptance, etc. And what Tim Walz did was volunteered to or responded to a request or volunteered to become the faculty advisor for a gay student and straight student interaction. And so
mm,
doing that, this is the classic football coach, macho, right? The boys, right? And all the locker room madness.
mhm,
But here's the coach for the boys saying to this one boy, uh, let's have a conversation and let's make it a place where everybody, all the boys, and I presume all the girls, can talk about how they see the world and in a way that respects them and affords them the
mm,
dignity that they deserve. So that was one of the things. And he talked about um, the idea of public policy that affirms people's discovery and presentation of themselves uh, based on their own sense of what it is to be authentic. And so I, I don't know if you watched any of that stuff a couple of days ago as it happened, but what's your sense of how our country is addressing this crossroads of politics that reflect this notion of people's right to identify as they
mm,
choose, to marry who they love, and to live in communities that they want to be in, versus what is being described as a patriarchal and oppressive model championed by Donald Trump and his running mate JD Vance. Any thoughts? What's happening in your mind and in the community as far as you can tell?
well, yeah, I mean, here's one of the things about okay, one of the reasons why I like spending half my time in Europe, in Germany, is because no one cares.
Hmm.
And no one cares to the point where no one even tells you they don't care because they really don't care. Like when Schultz was elected the new chancellor of Germany, a lot of people were asking, um, I was sitting around a table where this conversation happened, where we were talking about him, and I didn't actually know much about him because I don't know much about German politics. I'm like, so wh- who is this Schultz guy? Like, what's he like? And someone said, um, and they were talking about his political history, and one of them said, I think he's gay though. And someone else went, is he? He's like, yeah, I think so. And someone said, oh, I thought he was married. Oh. And everyone picked their phone up and went, oh, no, he's married to a woman. Yep. Can you imagine someone getting elected the president of the United States and that had never come up? That's what's interesting about living here. So when you go to the States, and it is an obsession, and I feel it the moment I'm back. I feel anxiety. I feel like we're fighting for survival in the States. We are fighting for our right to exist. This is another strange thing about being LGBTQ+. If you are, I think most other minorities, because of how you physically present to the world, no one questions it. It exists, you know. Us, they keep trying to tell us we don't exist. And we have to fight very hard to get people to just acknowledge we exist. We have to fight very hard so that we can now have all the prejudice that comes with the fact, okay, we acknowledge you exist now, and now we hate you. It's like, so it's, look, I think what you were describing about, it's Tim Walz. Is it Tim Walz?
Walz, yeah, W-A-L-Z.
What I like about him, I mean, that's the Friday Night Lights episode I wanted to see. That's what I was wishing someone was doing for me in high school. And he did that early, from what I've read, like in the 90s or something.
Yeah, right.
So bravo to him, because to be a coach and to do that, no one's going to question you. No, he's married to a woman, and he's decided to do this, and he's the coach of the football team, and the symbolism of that is huge.
And she's a teacher as well.
I mean, come on, like no one's going to argue with the guy. And so what that symbolizes is that it's okay. This person is okay. They're totally acceptable. And now we're going to have a conversation about it where everybody can ask each other questions. I love that. The fact that he facilitated that, what a human being. And at a time where there were no political aspirations at all, he's just doing that because he thinks it's something that should be happening. Yay. I mean, I don't like to profess my political views much in public, but that's someone I can get behind, but I think, this is something very important. And I hope your listeners take this to heart. I think for us outside, we cannot avoid the American election. I think a lot of Americans would struggle to name the leader of, say, Germany. We know your leader. We know who they're coming up against. We know their running mates. We know all the people who are being considered for the running mates. Like, we know the entire show, and we live with it because it is unavoidable. It's on every single news feed, what's going on with the US election. But we don't get to vote. Even as a green card holder, I don't get to vote. But we do have to live through it, and we have to live with America's choice. And the country has such incredible influence around the world that whoever America votes as their president becomes our president by default, because their actions have ripple effects across all of our lives. So I'm not going to tell anyone who's listening how to vote, but I beg you to vote. Let me speak for everybody else who doesn't live there. We beg you to vote. And I know a lot of people felt for a long time they didn't have anyone to vote for. And I know a lot of how the election days run, the voting days run, that a lot of people are prevented from going, and I get that. But if it is within your power to vote, please, the rest of the world begs you to vote, because you have so much influence. And I think a lot of Americans don't realize the outsized influence of it. Even within, and we feel this in every community, in the LGBTQ plus community of Berlin, I notice us taking on a lot of the issues that I don't even really know if they're necessarily ones that are relevant for us, but if it's happening in America, it's going to be happening in your community, wherever you are. Just give it a year. It'll be happening. So the enormous influence of the states, please vote. We just beg you to vote.
I don't know if you mentioned it or if I mentioned it, but the word patriarchy, you mentioned hierarchical. And when you said something about hierarchical structures, what comes to me is a question I raised with many of my guests about the patriarchal organization of society versus other models. Does that come into
Mm.
consideration? What does patriarchy mean to you? What does it mean to the LGBTQ plus community? Are there models separate from the European or Western or modern patriarchy hierarchical systems that could better serve all human beings, that could better serve humans in their relationship with the environment and with other you know, expressions of existence? What do you think?
I think that, look, for a long time, I used to say, I wish I lived in a world that was run by women, that I'm sick of living in a man's world. But I don't feel that way anymore. I think that is, when you've experienced one thing, look, the patriarchy hasn't been particularly great for us because, I think there's a perception of how a man is supposed to act. So the minute you go, like, the binary, I think, is very harmful for everybody. I don't think there's a single heterosexual cisgender person on the planet that hasn't had to kill off some part of themselves to fit into their culture's idea of what it is to be a man or a woman. And there's a lot of pain that comes with that. So when they see people from our community seemingly flaunting these things that they've given up so much for, the natural reaction is anger, because there's a lot of unresolved pain with that. And I think that, by then just jumping to a matriarchy instead, that's not the answer either. I was, something I would say about it, it really has to be all of us. It has to be all of us running everything together. And that, I know, sounds very utopian, but I don't see another way to do it, because whenever one particular group is in charge, someone's losing out. Even
By
if that
definition.
group doesn't mean for it to happen, other people are losing out. And it kind of brings me to, like, we opened up talking about DEI, and I think that is the ultimate aim, is we're trying to share the power is sort of shared and influenced by everyone. And I had a really unique experience when I was getting divorced. And it's one of the few times I've ever seen true equality in a meeting. I'm not in AA, but I understand that AA, the condition is the great equalizer. Divorce, I can tell you, is the great equalizer, because at my office, there was a group I was introduced to. Like I said, my community has no experience with divorce, but there was a group I was introduced to called the Straight Guys Divorce Club, which is what I called them anyway. But what was interesting was that, we would all meet at this concrete bench outside the office. And in the office, we all had roles we had to fill, and there was a hierarchy. Outside the office, talking at the divorce bench, we were just guys going through it. We were all going through the same thing, mail room to C-suite. There were 4 different religions, definitely many different political views. And also, but we were all survivors of the same shipwreck. We were all going through a divorce. So everybody's opinion had equal value. So we were very diverse by the fact that we were just going through a divorce, but it drew a real, motley crew of us together. But everyone's opinion had the same weight because everyone had been through it and everyone had learned something that they could give to the rest of the group. And, I didn't even necessarily agree with, some of the more, conservative guys in the group, religiously or politically, who might have issues with the fact that I'm who I am. We wouldn't necessarily agree on that stuff, but in that group, no one gets cancelled because we needed each other. We needed each other's support. So it was an interesting place to be, where I can disagree with you fundamentally about something, but we're still going to talk. I'll see you tomorrow here. It's a very rare and beautiful thing where no one's canceling anyone. And what it made me realize was there were things that I learned from being in the company of those men. And I learned the most from the guys who I thought I had the least in common with, the ones who had lived lives so completely different to mine, even against the idea of mine. And I learned more about myself from the questions they asked me, because we developed a trust because we're in conversation. And when there's that trust, and we've got a bit of an ask me anything, I think I was the first gay guy most of them had ever been close to. I don't want to use the word intimate because that connotes like sexual, but there was an
Sure,
intimacy in our
sure.
friendship where you could ask each other stuff. And what I found was interesting is often the question people would ask is not the question they meant. When you dig and you keep talking, you get to what they're really trying to ask you. And I think this is the problem in the world, is that we hear a question from a person we have already made a judgment about, and we've decided what they mean. And now I am going to react based on what I've decided you mean. And often the question they're asking, it's not what they mean. It's just the best vocabulary they've got. And they're using maybe the structures that they've grown up with or the environment they've grown up with. But they're asking you a question because they're not coming for you, they're coming to you. But I think we don't see a lot of that these days, because I think, the nail and the hammer thing, but I feel like everybody thinks they're the nail and everything else is the hammer. So, something that it showed me was that when a bunch of people with really diverse opinions get together and share an experience, and there's no punitive anything, just an openness and a willingness to be curious and answer questions for each other, I was amazed by what we did in that group and the power of that. That's something I would love to see happening everywhere. So back to your original question about a patriarchy, I think we all need each other. And, whereas James Baldwin, who I'm a huge fan of, said, I can disagree with you and still love you unless my disagreement with you, I'm paraphrasing, I'm probably getting it wrong, but so my disagreement with you is about my existence, then we cannot. No disrespect to Mr. Baldwin, but I think he said that at a time when we had more time. And I look at the planet and where we are now, and I just feel like, man, we're running out of time. Like, we do need to figure this out. Even if you don't like me, I think we all still need to be in conversation with each other. So that was something really valuable. I mean, who would have guessed that you get that out of getting divorced? But that's the journey, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You start on the journey and off you go. But I wrote this book about gay divorce, but it's leading into a career about DEI, it seems. So,
And so when you present on DNI, what are the messages that you discover yourself presenting, and where is the resonance in the audiences that you address, corporate in particular?
well, I think everything that every company needs to solve every problem it's got, it already has. It has it in the people there, but everyone is too afraid to speak. Everybody's being policed by everybody else in offices. And I think people are waiting for their opportunity to be offended. I've certainly had this happen to me, where something I've said quite innocently has been twisted or misunderstood. But then people have said, he said that. By the time you hear about it, it's 2 weeks later. That is the story. And I think people have seen this happen to so many people, and they're like, I can't afford to lose this job. I'm not saying anything. And so people are not talking. Well, everybody's got brilliant ideas. Everybody could be working really well together, but I think we're all afraid to talk to each other. And that's what I'm getting when I speak to people, is that, when I come in and I start to talk about this, people are like, thank you, for talking about this. And also the really important part is equity. Like, we're doing diversity quite well, I think. Well, it's the best it's ever been. Let's put it that way. But it's the equity part that's important. Yes, we've got all these diverse opinions, but we need to give them all equal weight, like we did in the Straight Guys Divorce Club, because that person's opinion is of equal value to yours. And that's often what is not happening. We're not giving this different opinions, especially really opposite opinions to ours, the same weight. But if you do that, inclusivity is a byproduct. Everyone feels included. You don't need to make that, That's what I'm finding anyway.
But if that common denominator baseline that the divorce club discovered, did it include the risk of the straight guys losing in their own mind themselves or their identity? And what's playing in the back of my mind now is the Trumpsters in Charlotte saying they will not replace us. There's a sense of being erased. And that's despite the fact that your existence was an existence of the erasure of other people.
I would say there is a fear, because I think there is a perception out there that DEI is coming to take things from you. And I think a lot of people are thinking that that's what it's about, and it's not that at all. I think when we all know this, we've all experienced it, when we're in true conversation with people, and people who give us the freshest perspectives on ourselves, who are the most opposite to us, we discover more about who we are. And we've all experienced that in conversations. We've all presumed we've known where someone is coming from, only when we talk and we discover what it's really about, but we learn more about ourselves. So these people who are afraid of losing everything, I think DEI is coming to give us more. That's what I think. I think we're trying to build a bigger pie, not take away people's slices of it.
Karl Dunn, what a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed
Thank you.
the book, How to Burn a Rainbow, and it's
Mhm.
available on Amazon. And I presume that if you're making speaking engagements, you'll let people know where you are, how they can check you out or follow your
Absolutely.
conversations around the world. But thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation.
You're
Final
very
comment.
welcome, mate. Thank you. Yeah, please. And also with the Amazon, just check, there is a ghost listing of that says it's out of print. It's not out of print. You
Okay.
click through, you'll find it. Amazon and I are trying to fix this, but it's anyway. But yeah, nice one. Listen, thank you so much for having me on the show, Al. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karl. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, go well.
I'm Al McFarlane.